Is this proof that the Bible is true? Welcome to part 2 of my response to a content creator who is sharing what they believe to be archaeological evidence that proves the Bible to be true.
King Solomon actually erected 2 pillars at the Red Sea commemorating this crossing. We see reference to this in Isaiah 19:19, and up at the top on the columns themselves, the Hebrew words Mizraim, which means Egypt, death, water, Pharaoh, Edom, Yahweh, and Solomon were all on the column.
This is also all entirely made up. Ron Wyatt was never able to produce any evidence whatsoever that any such inscription was ever found on any pillar. He claimed that there was a second pillar that had this inscription on it, but that the Saudi government absconded with it and won't let anybody see it, so there's only this one pillar. But this cannot be the pillar mentioned in Isaiah because the Hebrew word that is translated pillar is matzevah, which is not an architectural column, which is what we see here in the Roman style. A matzevah is a standing stone that is much shorter, has a flat face and a curved back, and then the face usually has some kind of inscription or iconography or something like that on it. So when we translate matzevah as pillar instead of standing stone, we generate ambiguity because in English, pillar can also refer to an architectural column. And if somebody does not know Hebrew, they might think a pillar means an architectural column, which is the problem with Ron Wyatt and everyone who spreads his information. They don't have any idea what they're talking about.
And if you're familiar with what happens when sand is superheated, it becomes like glass. Well, you have exactly that right here on the shoreline of the Red Sea where the crossing happened.
That is not at all melted sand. That's just called beach rock. That is a perfectly natural occurrence that we find on shorelines all around the world. It's the cementation of different kinds of sediment with carbonate materials. Once again, this is not evidence of anything from the Bible. It's just people who don't know anything about how the world around them works, just making stuff up because of confirmation bias.
And it takes about 3,000 degrees or more to melt that sand. And it's evenly melted. You can almost see like footprints. There's stones infused in this melted sand.
So the audio says you can almost see like footprints, and there are no footprints in that beach rock because that's a perfectly natural formation, but they're suggesting that some of the impressions kind of look like footprints, but then they show an image of actual footprints, and this content creator points and nods as if this is evidence of anything, but that's actually just footprints from White Sands National Park in New Mexico, and the combination of the audio and the video makes it sound like those footprints were found there, and they were not.
One of the next substantial events in the Exodus after the Red Sea crossing is the split rock at Horeb, where God provided water in the middle of the wilderness for the Israelites.
That is a natural formation. Splits like that can happen in rocks large and small all around the world. And while a lot of people will point to evidence of erosion as a sign that there was water that flowed from there, no such event could have caused the erosion that we find there. The erosion that we find there is in one direction all around the whole hill in parallel lines. That is the result of flash flooding in the area. The other type of erosion is perpendicular to the flash flooding erosion, and again, in parallel lines all the way across the entire area, not radiating out from the rock, and that is the result of glacial flows. So none of this supports in any way, shape, or form whatsoever the story from the Exodus.
Also in this area on Mount Sinai is a burnt mountaintop where God descended with fire, where he gave Moses the 10 Commandments. And right at the base of that mountaintop, which is the only burnt mountaintop in the entire area, by the way.
And that is 100% a lie. Here you can see, as we zoom out from Jabal Machla, that the entire area is covered in this contact metamorphic rock.
There is a spot where they theorize the golden calf was worshipped, and it even has drawings all over it to signify what they did there.
Absolutely nothing suggests that this has anything to do with the Exodus, the conquest, or the worship of any golden calf. There are a variety of different animals that are etched into that rock, and they are Nabatean in origin, meaning they date to 1,000 years or more after these events were supposed to have taken place.
Moving right along, most of us are very familiar with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where the Lord rained down sulfur balls. But again, is there any proof? Well, of course there is, because the Bible is true. So in the exact area that Sodom and Gomorrah would have been located, we find a complete ashy layer just beneath the surface.
So an ashy layer could refer to two different things, either a destruction layer associated with the conflagration and the destruction of some city, or the fact that all around the Dead Sea there is an awful lot of loose sediment made up of layers of aragonite and detritus laminae, which look to the untrained eye like layers of ash, but are actually perfectly natural sedimentary formations that, again, are found all around the Dead Sea and well beyond any possible site of Sodom and Gomorrah.
In this ashy layer, there is warped human bones and burnt pottery. And in this area, we also find a very large cemetery consisting of about 500,000 people. And in these graves, you will also find the warped bones, which led archaeologists to conclude that this was indeed a natural event.
So these are falsehoods that have been spreading since the 1970s during excavations at two locations near the southern Dead Sea known as Numera and Bab Edra. During the early part of these excavations, some of the excavators wondered if these could be the locations of Sodom and Gomorrah, and then they later changed their minds. And so if you read through their excavation reports, which this content creator very clearly has not, but which I have, and you can go to my video number McClellan 1596 for a more detailed account, you will see that there is a discussion about warped bones associated with Charnel House G1, which was destroyed in a conflagration in the early Bronze I period, around 3000 BCE or earlier. And the discussion relates to the fact that some of the bones are split and not warped, and some of them are warped and not split, which they say is an indication that this Charnel House, which is a place where corpses are stored, contained older corpses where the bones were dried out and newer corpses where they were not yet dried out. But again, this all happened 1,000 years before the life of any possible historical Abraham. So this has nothing to do with any possible historical Sodom and Gomorrah. Again, it's just falsehoods that are being spread and being repeated by people who do not bother to go read the data.
And of course, last but not least, we find 100% pure sulfur bowls all over the area.
Not only all over the area, but all over the Lyson Formation, all around the Dead Sea, and extending well beyond any possible historical Sodom and Gomorrah. And these are naturally occurring sulfur nodules that have a scientific explanation, and they cannot have fallen from the sky because there are absolutely no indications of impact on the sulfur nodules themselves and on the context in which they are found. This has nothing to do with burning sulfur falling from the sky.
Not only do we find petrified wood in the shape of a boat in the exact location that the Bible says, it's also to the exact measurements that the Bible says. This wood and the metal that is found within it is actually dated to the exact time period that the flood would have happened.
This is also all entirely made up. This is another fantasy that was promulgated by Ron Wyatt, and you can see this 1996 Journal of Geoscience Education article for how every single thing that they think is evidence that this is an ark is actually better explained by natural geological processes. There's no wood, there's no metal, it's just a bunch of natural rock formations.
Now, I know for most of the world, the Bible is just a storybook. It's just a fairy tale. It's not real. But yet everywhere that we look, all over the entire world, there is actual physical proof of the stories that are written.
No, there's not. We occasionally find evidence that certain people and events described in the Bible are historical, but none of it has anything to do with any supernatural events, and the majority of the things that are discussed in this video are just laughably false.
And I know how most people want to take one or two or even a few of these stories and just blow it off and say that scholars have debunked it. But I would challenge them and ask, at what point do all of these things stop being coincidence?
I have yet to see coincidences. I have seen a few actual very important artifacts, and everything else I have seen is just lies promulgated by people who do not bother to think critically, much less go verify the stories that they're being told.
At what point are they going to realize that they are looking at the proof that they constantly ask for?
At what point are you going to learn to think critically and Google competently? My fear is that the answer is at absolutely no point whatsoever. But the fit for this video has been Adonai and his Asherah.